Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Thicc Radio, the gaming podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim. So let's get into this. We're doing a very special episode, as James said. This is actually a bonus episode to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, originally released in 1971.
Ooh, yeah. So, for the record, we're probably going to do a couple of these episodes as time goes on. You know, we might do like a Christmas special. We might do like a something else. Who knows? So, as Tim was saying, this is a very special episode. As we said, 1971, which is kind of mad when you think about it. Like, it's a film that we all have seen when we were kids. Tim and I actually watched this together the same day that we've recorded this, in fact, just beforehand. And we'll be releasing that on our video tier as part of our chunks who like to watch. So if you'd like to see us live react to elements of the film, please feel free to subscribe and show your support and let us know what you think. We noticed as we were watching through the film, before you even get to the gain of content, there were so many iconic moments, and the film is really so prolific. Things like, I've got a golden ticket, and the motif of a golden ticket, the paraphrasing, the phrase to say, I've got the golden ticket, the ticket to success, the ticket to whatever, originated with this film. The World of Pure Imagination song that everyone knows, or the Candyman can, with a surprise that happened in that scene. Again, go to Chunks You Like to Watch to find out what happened. But, you know, before we even hit the gainer stuff, we really realized that 1971, 50 years ago, this film really came out and hit a lot of the audiences. So it's really no surprise that it got into the hearts, minds, and homes of every single person who watched it, that it really became a family classic, probably got played over and over and over again. So when it came to kids like us who were watching that film for the first time and then being shown it again and again and again, it's no wonder that various gaming fetishes would have cropped up over the course of this film. So, Tim, I want to ask you, you watched the film, give me your overview thoughts. Having now seen it again as an adult, what do you think?
I mean, it still holds up. Like, I liked it a lot when I was a child. And seeing it again as an adult, it stands the test of time. Sure, it's dated a bit in the cinematography tricks that they use, the practical effects, everyone's wardrobe and hair, you know, it looks very 70s, but the tale is, you know, it's a timeless one. It's basically a be careful what you wish for kind of situation with some of the kids. So yeah, it's a film that I still think is whimsical, and I love the music, and I love some of the practical effects that they used. So it's just one of those films that I think you will always have that will always have a particular place in your heart.
I definitely agree. I mean, watching it back just now, I realized like it's a film where you remember everything that happens, but I probably haven't seen this film in like a good 10, 15 years. So watching it back through as a learned adult, you realize just how many like snarky remarks Willy Wonka says, not only to the parents, but to the children.
Mm-hmm.
And
I love that about that character is, you know, anytime that he's being questioned whatsoever, it's a redirect or it's a smart ass comment. And of course, not explaining anything, because he's not the kind of character that explains anything.
Very Mary Poppins, that whole,
yes,
you make one thing quite clear. What is that? I never explain anything, before swishing off. And we agreed that both Willy Wonka and Mary Poppins are aquarii. They are aquarii.
Yeah, I would maybe with like a Scorpio rising.
With the Scorpio,
you know,
is chaos.
Yeah.
In fact, that sounds about right. And then the whole wind changing sudden personality shift, maybe that's like with a Gemini, whatever the third sign's meant to be.
Like their moon is in Gemini or something.
Exactly. Aquarii with a Scorpio rising and a moon in Gemini. That's Mary Poppins and Willy Wonka there for you.
Which really works for that type of character, that type of magical character. Because even though Willy Wonka doesn't display any magical powers, his factory is clearly not 100% natural. I mean, even without the Oompa Loompas, there are weird things that happen in this factory. So it's kind of like magic adjacent. And when you're that kind of character, you kind of have to be this very whimsical. I don't explain anything. It just is what it is. Go with it, have fun, learn a lesson. And if you fuck up, you'll be punished.
It's quite, yeah, it's very that. I'm curious, do you remember what you thought of it when you first saw it? When I'm assuming you were a child when you first saw it.
I don't remember what age I was. I mean, I was definitely a young child because it's one of those films that it's okay to show young kids. There's really nothing overtly scary in it. Well, except for that tunnel scene, which is a little weird. But I think I liked it. You know, like most of the films that I watched when I was a kid. I don't think it had quite the same impact on me that The Wizard of Oz did, but you know, it's just one of those films that you always have a nostalgic fondness for.
Absolutely. I think I must have been very young when I first saw this film, and I don't know if I connected the dots to fetishism straight away, like some people maybe did, but I remember being so enamored with this world. And it's funny, again, watching it as a more learned adult, knowing a little bit more about like old style special effects, you know, little things that you can see a little bit of the strings being pulled, like, oh, those props were clearly balloons, and this was clearly this, and ba-ba-da-ba. But so much of that film really feels like a real signpost to effects, you know, that magician sleight of hand. I mean, even his outfit, he kind of looks like a party trick magician when you think about it, with the top hat and the coat and tails and the brown and the purple, very
garish colors that kind of clash together,
and you can't quite take your eyes off him. You know, there's a moment near the start of the, well, not the start of the film, near the start of the factory tour, where he's walking out with his walking stick. Everyone's cheering, and he's sort of slowly hobbling towards the front gate, and everyone sort of like quiets down until you can hear a pin drop, and you can just see that of his walking stick and the clop of his shoes on the carpet. And there's this moment where he's right near the end of the gate, and, you know, he just is walking along with his stick, and the stick goes down, and then his hand comes up, and the stick is just wobbling in a crack in the pavement, which is, first of all, camp and hilarious. But then he almost immediately pauses, seemingly falls forward onto his face, and then at the last moment, tuck roll onto his feet, arms in the air with a whoopah, and everyone goes, yay! And that was a fully improvised scene. In an interview, Gene Wilder says, I did that so that you could never tell if Willy Wonka was ever being truthful or dishonest. You would never quite know the truth of it. And that lends itself perfectly to every scene that goes on, to the magic of what goes on, so that even now, as an adult, watching that performance back, there's that little part of me that still goes, that could be real. Like, it could,
I think it's
but it could be real.
I think it's also a great testament to how good Gene Wilder was as an actor. You know, having watched many of his films by this point, and he's so brilliant when it comes to physical stuff like that, stunts, comedy. He shines as a comedic actor. I mean, he's so good in any comedy he was ever in. So, like, to come back now and watch him again, it's like, he was just a genius.
And it is a little sad that he passed in 2016, so he didn't quite make the 50th anniversary. But, you know, he was born in 33. So by 71, 43, 53, 63, 70, he would have been 38.
Yeah.
That film came out. So, you know, he was already damn near middle age by the time all that rolled around, so 50 years later.
I am 38 years old. Thank you very much.
In acting years, darling. In acting years, that's what I meant.
Thank you very much. How very dare you?
I've got a drink here. I'm just gonna sip of my Fanta and just
calling me old, middle-aged.
Not old, just middle-aged.
I know. Oh, for Christ! In this day and age, middle ages are like your 60s at this point.
Well, you know, and you know what? That's also very true. You know, I think he probably would have been considered middle-aged back in the 70s. But you're right. And this is more the point. Times are changing. The world's a very different place. So have you ever seen, because times change and remakes happen, have you ever seen the 2005 version of the film?
I have. And I'm not a fan of it, if you can tell by the way I answered that question. I did not care for it.
Me either. I mean, it's a reimagining of the classic, that there's a change where instead of Mike being taken in by the TV situation. It's squirrels or something, right?
That was Veruca. Rather than fall through the egg chute to her
Oh, okay.
supposed demise, she was carried off by a bunch of squirrels.
Okay. See, that's how well I remember it, and I've had no inclination to rewatch it. I don't know. Johnny Depp's Willy Wonka was more. There was something very intentional about the outlandishness to kind of justify the insanity, as opposed to Gene Wilder's outlandishness, which was more a deliberate misdirect, a magician more than anything.
Yeah. Gene Wilder, like you said, played him like a stage magician, whereas Johnny Depp played him like an adult child. Yeah. Which I found very off-putting.
Very the Michael Jackson fantasy when you think about it, which is not for a children's movie, not after the accusations. So
I think my major issue with that film at that time that it came out, okay, so like Tim Burton had a long career before that movie came out. Mm-hmm. And Tim Burton in his early career, I really liked because I love Edward Scissorhands. I love the Batman movies. But Tim Burton got to a point in his career where he was almost too much Tim Burton for it to be good anymore. And he had worked so exclusively with Johnny Depp at that point that I was like, I don't want to see another awkward loner. Like, it's just not a thing anyway. Like, yeah, I know that those exist all over the world and plenty of people are awkward loners, but like, does it have to be every single protagonist of every film that you create?
Yeah, there's something about, and maybe this is more a critique of Tim Burton. I feel like maybe once you get known for a certain idea and you know that it works, you flog it until it's a dead horse, but maybe you don't realize it's a dead horse and continue to flog it. I mean, on a live recently, I think our friend Alex might have described Medea, the character, as a similar situation to Tyler Perry thing. Like, once is fine, twice is okay. More than that, it becomes a bit of a,
It was just one of those tropes that just got beaten to death, I think. I mean, I have not honestly enjoyed a Johnny Depp movie. I mean, a Tim Burton movie or a Johnny Depp movie. Let's just do both. I haven't enjoyed a Johnny Depp. Why can I not get this out?
You haven't enjoyed a Johnny Depp
film since Sleepy Hollow, and same thing with Tim Burton.
I mean, for me, Johnny Depp. My introduction to Johnny Depp, because of my age, was Pirates of the Caribbean.
Gotcha.
And the film series was fine, and then they made a fourth one without Orlando.
Yeah, that fourth one came out of nowhere.
And it was weird. It very much felt like we've got nothing going on and we're just going to try and shoehorn this in.
That's Disney for you. They'll milk a franchise until nobody cares anymore.
Yeah, it was all a bit much. But no, so look, if the 2005 version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is your favorite and is your film du jour, write to us, talk to us, comment on this, and share your thoughts with us, because for the pair of us, we were clearly inducted by the original, and the original just holds its own weight, But let us know what you think in the comments and send us a message. Because Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, as the book was called, was written by Roald Dahl, who we know as a prolific child author from back in the 20s, I think it was.
Yeah, I think that was when he really started to get published, was the 20s and 30s.
So again, listeners, please feel free to correct. And he's actually written, to speak to the gainer fetish, he's written quite a number of fat characters in different series. But something perhaps noticeable, because I've only read a couple of his. I didn't read the Charlie Chocolate Factory series myself, but there are videos of other people who've gone through and read through all of his work and said, he really seems to have a repeated issue with fat people. You'll often find that characters who he's trying to deign as really positive are usually the sort of scrappy, young, underfed child, much like, again, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and all the people with problems are fat and nasty and ugly with big, bulbous noses. And, there's a sort of language he uses to really describe people of size. I'm curious if you think that comes through in the film, or if maybe it doesn't because we're too busy being gainers and enjoying the fat fantasy, and maybe take the sort of teasing fat shaming meme and sexualize it and go, oh yeah, we love this.
I think that it would have been a lot more obvious that he had a problem with it if, say, if the only kid that had anything really terrible happen to him was Augustus. but all the kids except Charlie have something happen to them. And, they each kind of are done in by their own vice. Augustus is done in by his gluttony. Veruca is done in by her greed. I don't know, if I can't equate the other deadly sins to what the other kid. I mean, maybe Mike was a victim of, or maybe Mike was greed and Veruca was envy. I don't know. But if Augustus had been the only one to suffer, I think that would have made a wider commentary on how he felt about people that were overweight. But all the kids, have something terrible happen to them. And in the film, Augustus is kind of shown as just this mindless eating machine, as is his father. In fact, his mother is the only one who gets any sort of personality. In fact, I think Augustus only gets a handful of lines.
It's mostly
maybe 5 lines in the whole film. Where the mom, she's always running around and, Augustus, save some room for later, sweetheart, and being concerned about him when he winds up in the chocolate pipe and everything. So I don't know. I don't think so. I don't personally feel like the movie was trying to make that comment. I think the movie was basically saying shitty children have bad shit happen to them.
Yeah. And maybe in that moment, the film is as much for adults as it is for children, because, I think we've all come across an entitled little shit who you just think to yourself, if you could get kicked in the face by a horse and lose a couple of teeth, that would really fucking sort you out, wouldn't it? And maybe it's not a horse with teeth, but it could be a fucking chocolate pumping pipe, or it could be a trash chute, or a busy lifting drink. So I definitely agree. I don't really get the sense of fat shaming or negativity from the film. I think it is just a generic sense of bad shit happens to bad kids. You do the right thing, you get a chocolate factory at the end and a lifetime supply of chocolate. Very that fantasy. Speaking of the vices of the other children, you and I really noticed this as we were watching through the film, that yes, there's this obvious focus on Violet Beauregard, blueberry fetish, we all know it. And when we originally sat down to record it, we thought, should we just skip to that bit and just kind of focus around that? And we were like, no, let's just watch through it and just see what else crops up. And I'm really glad we did, because actually every single one of those kids touches on a different gainer fetish. So Augustus, first up, obviously gluttony, just stuffing, bloating, feeding, overconsumption. Maybe it's his clothes are too tight because, if you look at his outfit, he's stuffed into these German lederhosen, whatever the situation is. And then when he gets sucked up the pipe, his belly's so big, he's wedged into the pipe. He's stuck in the pipe. So, which
is a very common fantasy among some gainers, is to either get stuck in a doorway or get stuck, somewhere because the belly is too big and it can't squeeze through the opening.
So that's the fantasy. And then, of course, you've got Violet Beauregard, Blueberry. Need we say more? Then you've got Veruca Salt. And, you realize at some point she's just a brat. And actually, brat taming is a huge element in Blueberry. But it is also a thing when it comes to feeding and encouraging. You've got gainers who are brats that, no, don't feed me. I said, no, I said, oh, or you've got feeders who don't want to be bratty, but then they get turned into feeders because this big bossy gainer's making them do it. So there's the brat element. And then you've got, I think you picked up on this one with the fourth kid, Mike TV. Micro macro. He gets...
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it until we were watching it, and he gets shrunk down real small. And I was like, hey, this probably could have inspired a macro micro fetish in someone.
So it's interesting that every single one of the kids, and the one that we don't talk about is Charlie, who was technically the third one to fuck up. The fizzy lifting drink, burping, gassy, stomach noises, farting, belching, that's thrown in there too. And then, of course, you've got that kind of sadistic element of Willy Wonka. I think, Tim, you described him like a BDSM dungeon boss.
Yeah, it's like if you think of the factory as a BDSM dungeon, then Wonka is the dungeon master, the dom. And, of course, it might be a little bit uncomfortable to imagine him doing that with children, but, swap them out for adults. Just imagine that he's taming these bratty adults in their own specific ways.
And then,
and I'm sure that there's a fan fiction out there that's written exactly that way.
oh, totally. And then, of course, you've got the Oompa Loompas, which are, the unfortunate Steamworks members who, like, work the canteen for the snacks. They have to go into the dark room and, like, swab it out because they know that people have come through there and, like, oh, we gotta do this. Oh, my goodness. But, that's the film. And it's quite interesting to watch it back. Again, 50 years later, half a century. It is amazing that this film is still kicking. The original is clearly more beloved than the remake, and it's just so iconic. I would encourage listeners, please go and watch the film. As we say, we've got a copy of it up on the manager tier. Please feel free to subscribe and watch with us. So go check it out. Before we head, I actually wanted to ask one quick question of you, Tim. What would you want to see out of a future remake of the film?
Well, I mean, of course, I would love to see the blueberry scene done with an adult man, though I don't think that would really ever be done for any reason, obviously, because it wouldn't follow any bit of the book. But maybe, like, as an aside, it's like, an adult guy who's maybe working behind the scenes at the factory, like maybe he's just some average Joe that Wonka's hired, like janitor or something, gets curious and tries it himself. It's hard to describe what I'd like to see, because obviously if there's anything involving the fetish, I don't want to see a child. That would be problematic. But I don't know, I would like to see it stick a little bit more to the book, because even though the second film, the remake, attempted to stick closer to the book, it still kind of went off on a weird tangent. So maybe like a more faithful adaptation.
I like the sound of that. I think similarly to your first comment, I'd like to see it remade with adults. I mean, I get the idea of doing it with kids. It's meant to be that fantasy. But I don't know. I think even if you made it teens, and teens that were played by like early to mid 20 adults, that wouldn't be so bad. But yeah, I think anything that really hones in on those different elements and maybe fleshes them out a little bit more, anything that gives the characters more personality. Like, I think similarly to what you said, it was more the mother that spoke and had personality than Augustus. And even for the other kids, very similar.
Yeah, it was much more defined. Like Violet's dad had a very clear personality. Mike's mother it was very clear what her motivations were. Charlie's really the only one, because he is the protagonist, he gets the majority of the character development. But the other kids were basically sort of like one-note stereotypes of bratty children.
Yeah, except for Grandpa Joe, who was also a bratty child. We commented on this the whole fucking film. He comes home, Grandpa Joe, they're fun. You know what they're eating? It's cabbage water. And they're like, this is not for us. And then they look at this loaf of bread that Charlie bought, like, oh, it's a feast. And then Grandpa Joe's like, oh, I decided I'm going to give up tobacco. And I'm like, your people, your children and grandchildren cannot afford to eat anything but cabbage water. And you're only now giving up tobacco, you selfish cunt?
Well, then how about he can get out of bed and walk around? I was like, but why aren't you out there working?
When there's the promise of a golden ticket and a fucking lifetime supply of chocolate, he's suddenly like, oh, I think I can get up out of bed after this. His daughter would have been seething. If that was me, I would have broken both kneecaps and his nose. Just fucking.
I'll give you something to be an invalid about.
And don't get me wrong, he was funny, always had quick remarks, always an enjoyable character. But let's not forget, he's the one that convinced Charlie, let's steal the fizzy lifting drink. And he's the one that really got them killed. And then he's the one that ranted at fucking Willy Wonka at the end, being all like, you promised us chocolate, didn't give it to us, you're an inhuman monster. Like, no, Grandpa Joe, you're the monster. So I'd like to see him taken down a peg.
I feel like, maybe that's something we didn't even realize about Roald Dahl when he was writing these characters, because he does seem to have place a lot of hope in children, specifically children that understand the value of things, that don't take things for granted. Most of his protagonists, like if you take Matilda, She comes from a terrible family. Her family doesn't care about her whatsoever. They're horrible people. They cheat, they lie, they steal, and she's this virtuous girl, and she gets, the gift of telepathy, or telekinesis rather. Charlie is the downtrodden, kind-hearted, generous boy, and he gets the chocolate factory. Luke, actually, the witches is probably not a good example because that doesn't have a happy ending.
I think what I would sort of focus on at the end is Roald Dahl, whether he intended to or not, created something truly prolific. And I do find it interesting that it has remained iconic, not just in pop culture, but in the gainer community. It's a shame that Gene Wilder's passed, but I don't know. Like, if you listen to this, pull it out, hire it, torrent it, download it, stream it somewhere, watch it. Chances are you may not have seen it in a number of years, and you'll pick up on so many little moments that are hilarious. For a film made in the early 1970s, it still stands up today as an iconic film. And to put it out there into the void, thank you, Roald Dahl, for writing the book, and thank you to Gene Wilder for
an incredible performance that no one can forget.
Yeah. So whoever does the next remake, we've got some big shoes to fill. But that is it for this special episode of Thicc Radio. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a nice review. As always, you can find me on Grommr, Instagram, and TikTok at stannnum, and Twitter and YouTube at stannnum.bsky.
And you can find me on Grommr as Orpheus. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok as Thicky Mouse. And of course, you can find more of what we've talked about today on Instagram and Patreon at Thicc Radio.
And now we're on Twitter and TikTok too, also at Thicc Radio. So until next time.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stan and Thicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by Stan.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.